The shop that refused to die. The first sign that something was wrong came on a night when most people were trying to stay indoors. Rain rattled against the metal roof of Mercer Industrial Repair like handfuls of gravel. Water ran in thin streams down the workshop windows, blurring the yellow streetlights outside into long streaks of light. Inside, Eli Mercer was bent over an old electric motor clamped to a workbench. The motor belonged to a grain processing facility outside the city. It was nearly 30 years old, heavy enough to require 2 people to lift, and considered worthless by most modern service companies. Elijah adjusted his reading glasses and listened. Not looked, listened. The motor hummed unevenly under power. A faint vibration traveled through the steel bench. There, a damaged bearing. He shut the machine off. Silence settled into the workshop except for the rain and the ticking of cooling metal. "Still talking to machines?" a voice asked from the doorway. Eli looked up. Marta Ruiz stood there holding 2 paper cups of coffee. She owned a small grocery store across the street and had spent the better part of 20 years checking on him whenever storms rolled through. "Machines make more sense than people," Eli replied. Marta smirked. "You've been saying that since Clinton was president." She handed him a coffee. The warmth felt good against his rough hands. The workshop smelled faintly of machine oil, wet concrete, and old wood. Shelves climbed nearly to the ceiling, packed with boxes labeled in faded marker. Motors, valves, gaskets, bearings, components from companies that no longer existed. To outsiders, the place looked like a junkyard with walls. To Eli, it looked like memory. Marta glanced around. "You ever think about cleaning this place? I know where everything is. That's what worries me." A brief smile appeared on Eli's face before disappearing again. The truth was, business had slowed. Not suddenly, slowly, year after year. Factories that once repaired equipment now replaced it. Municipal departments outsourced maintenance. Companies bought newer systems with sealed components that weren't designed to be repaired at all. Most people saw efficiency. Eli saw waste. The city certainly wasn't interested in preserving shops like his. Across the riverfront, cranes dominated the skyline. Old warehouses were disappearing. New office towers were rising. Developers called it progress. Every few weeks, someone stopped by with an offer to buy the property. Every few weeks, Eli refused. The offers kept getting larger. His reasons for staying remained the same. When Marta left, the workshop felt larger somehow, quieter. Eli finished rebuilding the motor and wheeled it toward the shipping area. The clock on the wall showed nearly 8:30. Most repair shops would have closed hours ago. Mercer Industrial Repair had never operated like most repair shops. The sign above the office door still carried the company logo his father painted by hand decades earlier. The paint had faded. The lettering leaned slightly to one side. Eli had never fixed it. Some things deserved to age honestly. A sudden knock echoed through the building. Not the casual knock of a customer. Urgent, sharp, 3 quick hits, then another. Eli frowned. Nobody came here this late. He crossed the workshop floor and opened the door. A young man stood in the rain. Mid-20s, city utility jacket, soaked to the bone. Behind him sat a pickup truck with emergency lights flashing softly through the downpour. "You Eli Mercer?" "Depends who's asking." The young technician let out a nervous breath. "My supervisor said you're the only person left who might know what this is." He turned toward the truck bed. A tarp covered something large, heavy, metal. Eli followed him outside. Rain soaked through his flannel shirt immediately. The technician pulled back the tarp. Eli froze. Not dramatically, not visibly, but something shifted behind his eyes. The object was a mechanical control assembly. Old, very old. Cast steel housing, custom gear train, manual override linkage. The kind of equipment nobody manufactured anymore. The kind nobody should still be using. "What system is this from?" Eli asked quietly. The technician hesitated. "The North Reservoir Pressure Station." Eli stared at the machine. Rainwater ran down its damaged casing. A crack stretched across one side. Several components had sheared completely. For a moment he didn't speak. The North Reservoir. He hadn't heard that name in years. Not since before retirement age had started appearing in conversations around him. Not since before the city modernized most of its infrastructure. The technician shifted nervously. "You know it?" Eli crouched beside the assembly. His fingers traced a section of worn metal. Then he found what he was looking for. A tiny stamped marking. Nearly invisible beneath layers of grime. His marking. His hands had machined that section 40 years earlier, back when he worked on municipal infrastructure projects, back when dozens of repair specialists filled workshops across the city, back when people believed equipment should last. The young technician noticed the change in his expression. "What is it?" Eli didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked toward the dark skyline beyond the rain. Something felt wrong, not just because the machine was damaged, something deeper, something harder to explain. Finally, he stood. "Get it inside." The technician blinked. "You can fix it?" "I didn't say that." "Then why?" "Because I want to see who touched it." The technician frowned. "What do you mean?" Eli's eyes returned to the damaged assembly. There were fresh tool marks near one section of the housing. Recent modifications. Not original, not factory, not documented, and definitely not done by anyone who understood how the system worked. A knot formed in his stomach, the kind that experience creates before evidence does. The rain intensified overhead, inside the workshop. They rolled the machine beneath the fluorescent lights. Water dripped onto the concrete floor. Eli opened a rusted drawer and pulled out a set of measuring tools older than the technician standing beside him. Then he began examining the assembly. Slowly, methodically. The young man watched in silence. Several minutes passed. Then Eli stopped. His hand rested on a damaged section near the control linkage. His expression hardened. "What?" the technician asked. Eli looked up. For the first time all evening, genuine concern crossed his face. "This shouldn't be here." "What shouldn't?" Eli pointed toward a replacement component hidden deep inside the mechanism. A component installed recently. A component that didn't belong. The technician swallowed. "What does that mean?" Eli stared at it for a long moment. Outside, thunder rolled across the city. Inside, the old repair shop felt suddenly smaller, because the damaged machine wasn't the real problem. It was evidence of one, and whatever had happened beneath the city's water system had started long before tonight. The weak point beneath the city. By sunrise, Eli Mercer had not gone home. The rain had eased into a cold drizzle, but the workshop still carried the damp smell of wet steel and storm water. A desk lamp cast a pool of yellow light over the disassembled control assembly spread across his workbench. The young utility technician, Noah Grant, sat nearby nursing his third vending machine coffee. "You've been staring at that thing for 6 hours," Noah said. Eli tightened a jaw that had grown stiff from concentration. "And you've asked me the same question 4 times. Noah sighed. "So what's wrong with it?" Eli finally set down his calipers. "The broken parts aren't what's worrying me." He pointed toward the replacement component hidden inside the mechanism. "Whoever installed this didn't understand the system." Noah leaned forward. "It looks fine to me." "That's the problem." Noah frowned. Eli grabbed a grease pencil and sketched a rough diagram on a scrap sheet of cardboard. "This assembly controls pressure regulation between the North Reservoir and the main distribution network." Noah nodded. So this replacement piece changes how the system responds under stress." He drew a second line. "Under normal conditions, nobody notices." A third line. "But during sudden pressure surges, the margin for error disappears." Noah stared at the drawing. "You mean it could fail?" Eli didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked toward the workshop windows, where gray morning light filtered through the rain. "It already is." The words hung in the air. Noah shifted uncomfortably. "Shouldn't we tell someone?" Eli let out a quiet breath. "We will." His tone suggested he wasn't confident anyone would listen. 3 hours later, they were standing inside the city's water operations center. The building couldn't have felt more different from Eli's workshop. Everything was glass, polished floors, digital displays, and climate-controlled silence. Large monitors covered one wall, displaying maps of pipelines, pumping stations, and pressure readings. Engineers moved between workstations, carrying tablets instead of toolboxes. Eli immediately felt out of place. Not because he lacked knowledge, because nobody expected knowledge to look like him anymore. A project manager named Karen Holt listened politely as Eli explained his concerns. She wore a hard hat tucked under one arm and checked her watch twice during the conversation. When he finished, she folded her arms. "So you're suggesting an undocumented modification is threatening the entire pressure network?" "I'm saying the system isn't behaving the way its designers intended." Karen glanced toward one of the engineers. "We haven't seen anything alarming in the data." Eli nodded. "Because the problem only appears under specific conditions, heavy demand combined with surge pressure." Karen looked back at the monitors. "The models don't indicate that risk." Eli's expression hardened slightly. "The models don't know someone changed the machine." A brief silence followed. Not hostile, just uncomfortable. Karen finally smiled, the kind of smile people use when trying to end a conversation. We appreciate the input, Mr. Mercer. Input. The word irritated him more than it should have. After 40 years working around machinery, he knew the difference between a suggestion and a warning. Outside the building, Noah kicked at a puddle. That went badly. Eli watched traffic move through the wet streets. No. Noah looked surprised. No? They listened. They listened enough to remember the conversation if something happens. The answer sounded grim even to Eli. 2 days later, something happened. A pressure fluctuation triggered alarms at 3 separate pumping stations. Nothing catastrophic, nothing dramatic, but enough to get attention. Enough for Karen Holt to call. By sunset, Eli and Noah were descending into an underground inspection tunnel beneath the city. The air was cool and damp. Concrete walls stretched into darkness. Water dripped steadily from overhead pipes. Their flashlights carved narrow tunnels through the shadows. The deeper they walked, the older the infrastructure became. New steel gave way to older cast iron systems. Modern markings disappeared. Hand-stamped identification numbers began appearing on valves and housings. Eli recognized many of them. Some carried the names of manufacturers that had vanished decades ago. Others had been installed by crews he once worked alongside. Ghosts of working lives hidden beneath millions of footsteps. Noah broke the silence. You miss it? Miss what? When all this was being built? Eli considered the question. Sometimes. Noah shined his flashlight down another corridor. My generation mostly sees infrastructure on screens. Eli nodded. That's part of the problem. They reached a junction chamber. A massive pressure control assembly dominated the space. Steel pipes wider than pickup trucks disappeared into opposite walls. The steady vibration of moving water echoed through the chamber. Eli approached slowly. His flashlight settled on a familiar section of machinery. Then he saw it. The same modification, the same replacement component, the same shortcut. Only this time it was connected to active infrastructure. His stomach tightened. That's it, he said quietly. Noah stepped closer. You sure? Unfortunately. A voice echoed from behind them. So it really is there. Eli turned. A man in his early 60s emerged from the shadows of the access tunnel. Expensive rain jacket, safety helmet, tired eyes. For a moment, neither man spoke. Recognition arrived slowly, then all at once. Daniel. The name barely left Eli's mouth. Daniel Reeves stopped several feet away. Years earlier, Daniel had been a teenager sweeping floors inside Mercer Industrial Repair. Later, he became Eli's apprentice, then an engineer, then an executive overseeing major infrastructure projects across the region. The success story everyone admired. The young man who had gone further than anyone expected. Noah glanced between them. You two know each other? Daniel gave a small smile. He taught me almost everything I know. The words should have sounded warm. Instead, they carried something heavier. Regret. Eli's eyes drifted toward the modified component, then back to Daniel. The silence that followed answered questions neither man wanted to ask. I didn't design it. Eli remained still. But you approved it. Daniel didn't respond. He didn't need to. The truth was already standing between them. Years earlier, budget deadlines, political pressure, and construction schedules had created compromises. Small decisions, temporary fixes, adjustments nobody expected to matter, until they did. The vibration from the pipes seemed louder now, more ominous. Noah looked confused. What happens if this fails? Neither man answered immediately. Finally, Daniel spoke. His voice was quieter than before. If conditions get bad enough, he glanced toward the machinery. A large part of the city's water network could lose pressure. Noah's face paled. Above them, thunder rumbled faintly through the earth. A storm front was moving toward the city. And for the first time, all 3 men understood the same thing. The danger wasn't theoretical anymore. It was approaching, fast. The last people who knew how. The storm arrived just after midnight. By 2 a.m, emergency alerts were lighting up screens across the Water Operations Center. Pressure fluctuations spread through the network like ripples across a lake. One station reported unstable readings, then another. Then a third. Outside, rain hammered the city. Wind pushed against office towers and rattled construction fencing along half-finished developments. Inside the control center, engineers moved quickly between workstations. Nobody was panicking. Yet. But the atmosphere had changed. The confidence that usually filled the room had been replaced by something far less comfortable. Uncertainty. Karen Holt stood near the main display wall studying incoming data when her phone rang. She answered immediately. A few seconds later, her expression changed. Not fear, recognition. She looked toward Daniel Reeves. North Reservoir just lost its backup regulator. The room grew tense. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. That was the scenario they had feared, the one Eli had warned them about. Karen didn't hesitate this time. Call Mercer. 20 minutes later, Eli stepped into the operations center carrying a weathered canvas tool bag. Rainwater dripped from his jacket onto the polished floor. Several engineers looked up. A week earlier, most had viewed him as a stubborn repairman from another era. Tonight, nobody seemed interested in arguing. Karen walked directly toward him. We need options. Eli glanced at the pressure maps. Red warning indicators blinked across multiple districts. He didn't waste time. The replacement assemblies? Karen shook her head. Manufacturing estimate is 12 days. We don't have 12 days. We know. Daniel approached carrying a stack of engineering drawings. The backup systems won't hold if the storm keeps increasing demand. Eli studied the drawings. Then he looked at the room. Young engineers, system analysts, project managers, highly educated professionals, and none of them had ever been taught how the original assemblies were built, because nobody thought they would ever need to know. The realization settled heavily across the room. Finally, Eli spoke. There may be another way. Everyone looked at him. What way? Karen asked. Eli reached into his tool bag and removed a worn leather notebook. The cover was cracked from decades of use. Its pages were stained with oil and age. Daniel recognized it immediately. The shop records. Eli nodded. Not just records. He opened the notebook. Hand-drawn measurements covered the pages. Machining tolerances, material specifications, repair procedures, notes scribbled in margins, changes documented over decades, information that existed nowhere else. The room fell quiet, not because people were impressed, because they suddenly understood what they were looking at. Preserved by someone everyone had overlooked. Karen leaned closer. You kept all this? I keep things that still matter. Daniel gave a small, almost embarrassed smile. Eli had said those same words when Daniel was 17 years old, back when he thought old notebooks were useless, back when he thought progress meant replacing everything that came before it. Now he wasn't so sure. By dawn, Mercer Industrial Repair was alive in a way it hadn't been for years. Work lights illuminated every corner of the building. Machines that had sat idle for months roared back to life. The old lathe turned steadily. A milling machine cut replacement components from raw steel stock. Compressed air hissed through hoses. The familiar sounds echoed through the workshop like a heartbeat returning after a long silence. Engineers crowded around workbenches beside mechanics. Digital modeling software sat next to hand-drawn schematics. Young technicians who had spent their careers staring at screens now watched metal being shaped by hand. At first, they struggled. Measurements were missed. Parts were machined incorrectly. Mistakes happened. Eli expected that. Real learning always looked messy. One apprentice named Maya ruined 2 components before finally producing one that met specifications. She stared at the finished piece in disbelief. I didn't think people still made things like this. Eli examined her work. A slight nod. High praise from him. Now you know. For the first time, Maya smiled. Across the room, Daniel worked beside Eli assembling one of the rebuilt regulators. Hours passed with little conversation, not because they were angry, because some conversations take time to find their way to the surface. Eventually, Daniel broke the silence. I should have listened years ago. The old repairman continued tightening bolts. You listened. Daniel looked confused. No, I didn't. You listened. Eli finally looked at him. You just stopped hearing. The words landed harder than criticism. Daniel stared at the workbench. The storm rattled the windows. For a moment, he looked like the apprentice who used to sweep floors after school. Not the executive everyone knew, just a man carrying regret. I thought modernization meant leaving the old ways behind. Eli picked up the finished assembly. Most people do. Then, after a pause, the trick is knowing what not to throw away. Neither man said anything else. They didn't need to. Some wounds heal through understanding rather than apology. 36 exhausting hours later, the rebuilt regulators were installed. The storm finally began moving east. Pressure readings stabilized. Alarm indicators disappeared one by one. District after district returned to normal operation. Inside the operations center, exhausted workers watched the system settle into balance. No cheering erupted, no dramatic celebrations, just relief, the kind that arrives quietly after a long fight. Karen approached Eli near the back of the room. "You saved us." Eli shook his head. "No." She frowned. "No?" He looked around, at engineers, mechanics, technicians, apprentices, Daniel, everyone who had worked together. The city saved itself. Karen understood. The solution hadn't come from one person. It came from knowledge people had finally decided was worth respecting. Several weeks later, sunlight filled the streets for the first time in what felt like ages. The redevelopment project resumed. Construction crews returned. Cranes moved again. Life pushed forward. Yet something had changed. Mercer Industrial Repair still stood exactly where it always had. The surrounding lots were being transformed, but the tiny workshop remained. Not because of sentiment, not because of publicity, because city officials had designated it as a technical preservation and training facility, a place where older infrastructure knowledge would be documented and passed on, a place where forgotten skills would survive. One afternoon, Eli stood near the workshop window, watching a group of apprentices solve a machining problem without asking for help. Maya was among them. So was Noah. They argued, made mistakes, corrected each other, learned, exactly as they should. On the workbench beside Eli rested the old leather notebook. For decades he had feared its contents would disappear with him. Now that fear felt smaller. Outside, the city gleamed beneath clear skies. Inside, machinery hummed steadily. Eli closed the notebook and placed it on a shelf. Then he turned off his desk lamp. The younger workers barely noticed. They were too busy working. A faint smile crossed his face. Not because he was needed, because one day he wouldn't be. And for the first time in many years, that felt like enough. The little repair shop everyone mocked never became famous. It never became rich. It never became the biggest workshop in the city. But when the moment came that the city needed something it thought it had outgrown, the answer was waiting in a building everyone had stopped seeing. And long after the storm had passed, the most important thing Eli Mercer repaired wasn't a machine. It was the connection between memory and progress, between experience and innovation, between what the city wanted to become and what it could never afford to forget. The city had mostly forgotten the emergency. That was the strange thing about infrastructure. When it worked, nobody thought about it. People turned on faucets, businesses opened their doors, schools filled with students, restaurants served meals. Life continued. And beneath all of it, thousands of miles of pipes, valves, pumps, and regulators quietly did their jobs. The crisis that had once dominated news reports had already been replaced by newer stories, election debates, construction projects, economic forecasts. The city moved forward. Cities always did. Yet every morning, a small group of apprentices still arrived at Mercer Industrial Repair before sunrise. The old shop looked different now. Not newer, not polished. Different. The faded sign still hung above the entrance. The concrete floor still carried decades of oil stains. The shelves still held boxes older than some of the people working there. But there was movement, energy, purpose. The building no longer felt like a place waiting to disappear. It felt like a place beginning another life. Eli Mercer noticed the change most during quiet moments, like this morning. Sunlight filtered through the workshop windows while dust drifted through narrow beams of light. The old wall clock ticked steadily. Machines hummed. Metal clicked against metal. The sounds were familiar. Yet the voices weren't. Young voices. Questions. Arguments. Laughter. The sounds of people learning. Eli stood near a workbench reviewing a set of notes when Maya approached carrying a steel housing assembly. "I think something's wrong." Eli looked up. "What kind of wrong?" "The annoying kind." A small smile appeared on his face. "Let's see." She placed the component on the bench. Eli examined it carefully. Several measurements, a few surfaces, the mounting points. Then he handed it back. "Nothing wrong with it." Maya frowned. "The alignment is off." "No." She checked again. "It is." "It isn't." Now she looked genuinely confused. Eli folded his arms. What does the drawing say? She pulled out the blueprint. 320 millimeters. What did you measure? 319.7. And what's the tolerance? Maya stopped, looked again, then groaned. 0.5 millimeter. Exactly. Across the workshop, several apprentices laughed. Maya rolled her eyes. You knew I'd missed that. I was hoping you'd find it yourself. She shook her head. That's irritating. Good. Means you'll remember it. The apprentices laughed again. This time, Maya joined them. Moments like that mattered more than most people realized. Skills weren't transferred through manuals alone. They passed through conversations, mistakes, corrections, shared experience. Knowledge moved from one person to another in ways no computer database could fully capture. And Eli understood that now better than ever. For years, he had assumed preserving knowledge meant protecting it, storing it, guarding it, keeping it safe. He had been wrong. Knowledge survived by being shared. Later that afternoon, Daniel Reeves arrived carrying a cardboard box. He walked into the workshop and set it on Eli's desk. What is it? Daniel opened the lid. Inside were dozens of old project files, engineering records, maintenance reports, historical infrastructure documents. Many dated back 40 or 50 years. Eli raised an eyebrow. Where'd these come from? Storage archive. I thought they destroyed most of those. So did I. Daniel leaned against the desk. We found an entire room nobody had touched in decades. Eli carefully lifted one of the folders. Handwritten inspection reports, original installation records, names of workers long gone. Some he remembered, some he didn't. But all of them represented lives spent building things meant to last. Daniel watched him quietly. You know, he said, I used to think old records were just paperwork. Eli smirked. I remember. Daniel laughed. You told me once that every machine has a memory. I did. I thought you were being poetic. You thought I was being old. Daniel couldn't argue with that. The two men stood in comfortable silence for a moment. Their relationship had changed during the months since the storm. Not repaired overnight. Nothing real ever was, but rebuilt, piece by piece, like machinery, like trust. Daniel glanced around the shop. You ever think about retiring? Eli looked toward the apprentices, toward Maya explaining measurements to Noah, toward sparks flashing briefly from a welding station, toward notebooks being filled with new ideas. Then he shrugged. I think about working less. Daniel laughed. That's the closest thing to retirement you're ever going to get. Probably. That evening, after everyone left, Eli remained behind. The city outside glowed beneath the orange light of sunset. Traffic moved steadily beyond the riverfront. Construction cranes stood motionless against the fading sky. He walked slowly through the workshop, past workbenches, past shelves, past machines that had accompanied him through most of his adult life. Every corner held memories, some good, some painful, some he barely remembered. At the back of the building stood a framed photograph. His father, taken decades earlier, standing in the same workshop, the same concrete floor, the same walls. Different time, same purpose. Eli stopped in front of the photograph. For a long moment, he simply looked at it. Then he noticed something. The expression, a quiet satisfaction, not pride, not achievement, something deeper. The satisfaction of building something that outlasted you. For years, Eli believed the shop itself was the legacy. The building, the tools, the records, the machines. Now he understood differently. Those things mattered, but they weren't the real inheritance. People were. The apprentices, the technicians, the engineers willing to learn, the workers who would carry knowledge forward and improve it. That was what remained. That was what survived. Outside, evening shadows stretched across the city. Eli turned off the final workshop light and headed toward the door. Before leaving, he glanced back one last time. The shop was quiet again, but it no longer felt lonely. Tomorrow morning, the doors would open. The machines would start. Questions would be asked. Mistakes would be made. Lessons would be learned. And somewhere in that process, the future would continue borrowing from the past. Eli stepped outside and locked the door behind him. The river reflected the last traces of sunlight. A cool breeze moved through the street. For the first time in years, he wasn't worried about what would happen when he was gone. because the knowledge wasn't trapped inside notebooks anymore. It lived in people, and people carried things much farther than buildings ever could. As he walked home beneath the fading sky, the old repair shop stood quietly behind him. No longer the city's last hope, something better,